Karen couldn't believe her eyes as she watched the elderly woman struggle to push her wheelchair up the steep hill. Without a moment's hesitation, she bounded over and grabbed the handles, determined to help. "Here, let me show you a shortcut," Karen exclaimed, already steering the wheelchair down a narrow alley. The woman protested, but Karen's forceful personality drowned out her feeble objections. As they careened down the dimly lit path, the woman clutched the armrests in terror. "Please, slow down. This isn't the way," she cried, but Karen ignored her. Suddenly, the wheelchair hit a crack in the pavement, sending it lurching sideways. The woman let out a terrified scream as she felt herself tipping over. Karen, caught off guard, lost her grip, and the wheelchair toppled onto its side. The woman lay sprawled on the ground, her legs twisted at an unnatural angle. Karen stared in horror, paralyzed by the realization of what she had done. A crowd began to gather, and someone called for an ambulance. As the wail of sirens approached, Karen knew she had to get out of there. Panicked, she fled the scene, leaving the injured woman behind. All she could think about was the trouble she would be in if the police found her. Karen ran all the way home, her heart pounding. Once inside, she collapsed on the sofa, trying to catch her breath. She knew she had done something terrible, but the fear of the consequences consumed her. Hours later, the news broke about an elderly woman who had been found injured in an alley, the victim of a hit and run. Karen watched the report, her stomach churning with guilt. She had never meant for anyone to get hurt. She was just trying to help. But now, an innocent person lay in the hospital because of her impulsive actions. As the night wore on, Karen's anxiety grew. She couldn't sleep, haunted by the image of the woman's twisted legs and the sound of her terrified screams. What if the woman didn't survive? What if the police came looking for her? Karen's mind raced with endless what-ifs, and she knew she had to do something. The next morning, Karen woke up with a plan. She would go to the hospital, find the woman, and apologize. Maybe she could even offer to help with the medical bills. Surely, the woman would understand that it was an accident, and she would forgive her. Karen's heart raced with a mixture of hope and dread as she headed out the door, determined to make. As Karen approached the hospital, her palms grew sweaty and her heart raced. She knew she had to face the consequences of her actions, but the fear of what might happen was overwhelming. Steeling her nerves, Karen strode up to the front desk, her voice shaking as she asked about the elderly woman from the accident. The receptionist eyed her warily, but after a few tense moments, she provided the room number. Karen's stomach twisted as she made her way to the woman's room. She paused outside, taking a deep breath before pushing open the door. The woman lay in the bed, her leg propped up in a cast. She turned her head, her eyes widening as she recognized Karen. "You!" she exclaimed, her voice laced with accusation. "What are you doing here?" Karen swallowed hard, her courage faltering. I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I never meant for you to get hurt. I was just trying to help. And then the wheelchair." Her voice trailed off, the weight of her actions sinking in. The woman's expression softened, but only slightly. "Help," she scoffed. "You call this helping? I could have been killed." Karen felt her cheeks flush with shame. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I panicked and I ran away. But I had to come and apologize and see if there's anything I can do to make it up to you." The woman eyed her skeptically. "Make it up to me? Do you have any idea how much this is going to cost?" "I don't have the kind of money to cover these medical bills." Karen's heart sank. She hadn't even considered the financial implications of her actions. I don't know what to say. Is there anything I can do to help?" The woman let out a heavy sigh. "I suppose the best thing you can do is leave and never bother me again. Just stay away." Karen felt tears stinging her eyes, but she knew she deserved the woman's anger. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, turning to leave. As she walked out of the hospital, Karen felt a heaviness in her chest. She had tried to help, but instead, she had caused harm. The guilt was overwhelming, and she couldn't help but wonder how she was going to. Over the next few days, Karen couldn't shake the guilt that weighed heavily on her. She replayed the incident in her mind, cringing at the memory of the woman's terrified screams and the sickening sight of her twisted legs. Determined to make amends, Karen decided to take action. She knew the hospital bills would be expensive, and she wanted to help cover the costs. Scrolling through her contacts, she found the number of a former coworker who worked at the hospital's billing department. With a trembling hand, Karen dialed the number. "Hi, Sarah. It's Karen. I need a favor." After explaining the situation, Sarah agreed to look into the woman's case and provide Karen with the details. Karen thanked her profusely, promising to make it up to her somehow. A few days later, Sarah called back with the information. The woman's name was Mrs. Evelyn Sinclair, and her medical bills had already exceeded $25,000. A staggering amount that Karen knew she could never afford to pay on her own. Undeterred, Karen set out to raise the money. She started by liquidating her savings, but that only covered a fraction of the cost. Desperate, she turned to her friends and family, pleading with them to contribute. Some were sympathetic to her plight, while others recoiled in shock when they heard the details of the incident. Karen's sister, in particular, was furious, berating her for her reckless and entitled behavior. "You could have killed that poor woman," she shouted. "Why on earth would you think it was okay to just take over her wheelchair like that?" Karen hung her head in shame, unable to defend her actions. I know. I messed up, okay. But I'm trying to make it right. I need your help." Her sister reluctantly agreed to contribute, but the rest of her family remained skeptical. Karen was determined, however, and she pressed on, organizing fundraisers and reaching out to local businesses for donations. The response was mixed, with some people eager to help and others outright refusing. Karen's reputation as an entitled, impulsive woman had preceded her, and many were wary of getting involved. As the bills continued to pile up, Karen's desperation grew. She knew that if she couldn't raise the money, Mrs. Sinclair would be left to shoulder the burden alone. The thought of that weighed heavily on her conscience, and she vowed to do whatever it took to make things right. With a newfound sense of purpose, Karen redoubled her efforts, determined to prove that she was more than just the entitled, reckless woman everyone. As the days turned into weeks, Karen's quest to raise funds for Mrs. Sinclair's medical bills consumed her every waking moment. She organized bake sales, car washes, and neighborhood garage sales, tirelessly spreading the word and pleading for support. Despite her best efforts, the response from the community was lukewarm at best. Many were still wary of her motives, and some even went so far as to accuse her of trying to profit off of the incident. "You're just trying to save your own skin," one skeptical neighbor sneered. "Why should we believe you actually care about this woman?" Karen felt the sting of those words, but she refused to be deterred. She knew that what she had done was wrong, and she was determined to make it right, regardless of what anyone else thought. One day, as Karen was putting up flyers around town, she ran into Mrs. Sinclair's granddaughter, Sarah. The young woman was visibly shaken, her eyes red from crying. "I heard about what happened to my grandmother," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't believe someone would do that to her." Karen's heart sank as she watched the pain and anger in Sarah's eyes. I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just trying to help, and then everything went so wrong." Sarah stared at her for a long moment, her brow furrowed in disbelief. "Help," she scoffed. "You call leaving my grandmother injured and alone in an alley helping?" Karen felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I know. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm trying to make it right. I've been raising money to cover her medical bills, but it's been so hard. I feel awful about what happened, and I just want to do whatever I can to help her." Sarah's expression softened ever so slightly, and she let out a deep sigh. Look, I appreciate that you're trying to make amends, but my grandmother is in a lot of pain right now, both physically and emotionally. She's terrified to even leave the house, and the medical bills are piling up. I don't know if she can ever fully forgive you for what you've done. Karen nodded slowly, her heart sinking. I understand. I want her to know that I'm truly sorry, and that I'm going to do everything in my power to help her get through this. Sarah considered her words for a moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small card. Here's the contact information for the hospital's social worker. They might be able to help us navigate the financial aspects of this. Karen took the card, her fingers trembling. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As Sarah turned to leave, Karen couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could make this work. With the hospital social worker's contact information in hand, Karen wasted no time in setting up a meeting. She knew that her efforts to raise funds were crucial, but she also recognized the need for professional guidance to navigate the complex medical system. When the day of the meeting arrived, Karen's stomach was in knots. She had never been good at asking for help, and the thought of sitting across from a stranger and laying bare her mistakes made her feel incredibly vulnerable. As she stepped into the social worker's office, she was greeted by a warm, welcoming smile. Hi, Karen. Please have a seat, the social worker said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Karen sat down, her hands trembling slightly. Thank you for meeting with me. I don't really know where to start. The social worker nodded sympathetically. I understand this must be a difficult situation for you. Can you tell me a bit more about what happened? Taking a deep breath, Karen recounted the events that had led her to this moment. The impulsive decision to take control of Mrs. Sinclair's wheelchair, the devastating accident, and her subsequent efforts to raise funds for the medical bills. As she spoke, the social worker listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. Karen felt a sense of relief as she unburdened herself, finally able to share the full weight of her guilt and regret. When she had finished, the social worker leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Karen, I can see that you're genuinely remorseful for what happened. However, I also understand that your actions have had very real and serious consequences for Mrs. Sinclair. Karen nodded, her eyes downcast. I know. I've been trying to raise money to cover her medical bills, but it's been so hard. I don't know if I'll be able to come up with the full amount. The social worker considered this for a moment. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're making an effort to take responsibility. That shows a lot of integrity. Let me see what I can do to help you navigate the financial aspect of this situation. Over the next hour, the social worker walked Karen through various options, from applying for medical assistance programs to negotiating a payment plan with the hospital. She also suggested reaching out to local community organizations that might be willing to provide additional support. As Karen left the meeting, she felt a newfound sense of hope. The social worker had been kind and understanding, and she had given Karen the tools and resources she needed to continue her quest to make amends. With a renewed determination, Karen set out to put the social worker's advice into action, resolving to do whatever it took to ensure that Mrs. Sinclair's medical bills were. In the weeks that followed, Karen threw herself wholeheartedly into her mission to raise funds for Mrs. Sinclair's medical bills. With the social worker's guidance, she secured a meeting with the hospital's financial assistance coordinator, who agreed to work with her on a manageable payment plan. Emboldened by this progress, Karen doubled down on her community outreach efforts. She organized a series of fundraising events, from bake sales and car washes to a neighborhood garage sale. To her surprise, the response from the community was more positive than she had anticipated. While some people still harbored doubts about her motives, many were moved by her genuine remorse and her unwavering determination to make amends. Slowly but surely, the donations began to trickle in, and Karen felt a sense of cautious optimism that she might just be able to pull this off. As the funds accumulated, Karen made regular visits to the hospital, anxiously awaiting updates on Mrs. Sinclair's recovery. Each time, she was greeted with a mixture of gratitude and wary apprehension from the elderly woman and her family. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, dear," Mrs. Sinclair would say, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I'm not sure I can ever fully forgive you for what happened." Karen would nod solemnly, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her actions had caused such lasting trauma. "I understand, Mrs. Sinclair. I just want you to know that I'm truly sorry, and that I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Despite the lingering tension, Karen could see a glimmer of hope in the older woman's eyes. She knew that it would take time and patience to rebuild the trust she had shattered, but she was determined to see this through to the end. As the hospital bills began to dwindle, thanks to Karen's tireless efforts, Mrs. Sinclair's family started to warm up to her. They were still cautious, but they could see the genuine remorse and commitment in her actions. One day, during one of her visits, Mrs. Sinclair reached out and grasped Karen's hand, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and forgiveness. "Thank you, my dear," she said softly. "I know this hasn't been easy for you, but I appreciate the effort you've made to make things right." Karen felt a lump in her throat, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Sinclair. I hope you can forgive me someday." The older woman gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "I'm getting there, dear. It's going to take time, but I believe you're on the right path." As Karen left the hospital, she felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. It wouldn't be an easy road, but she knew that she had taken the first step toward. In the months that followed, Karen's relationship with Mrs. Sinclair and her family continued to evolve. While the initial distrust and resentment had not fully dissipated, there was a growing sense of cautious understanding and even tentative forgiveness. Through her tireless fundraising efforts and regular visits to the hospital, Karen had slowly managed to chip away at the walls that had been erected between them. She listened intently as Mrs. Sinclair shared the details of her long and painful recovery, her heart aching at the thought of the trauma she had inflicted. One day, during a particularly candid conversation, Mrs. Sinclair turned to Karen with a thoughtful expression. "You know, my dear, I've been thinking a lot about what happened that day. About how you came barreling into my life, determined to help me, and ended up causing me so much harm." Karen felt her stomach twist with guilt, but she remained silent, knowing that Mrs. Sinclair needed to express her feelings. "At first, I was so angry. I couldn't understand how someone could be so reckless and thoughtless. But then, as I watched you pour your heart and soul into making things right, I started to see a different side of you." Mrs. Sinclair paused, her gaze thoughtful. "You know, we all make mistakes, Karen. Sometimes, we don't even realize the impact our actions can have on others. But what matters is how we choose to respond to those mistakes." Karen nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Sinclair. I never meant to hurt you. I was just, I don't know. I guess I thought I was being helpful, but I was so wrong." "I know, dear," Mrs. Sinclair said gently, "and I can see now that you're truly remorseful. That's why I've decided to forgive you." Karen's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. You forgive me?" Mrs. Sinclair nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yes, my dear, I forgive you. It's been a long and difficult road, but I can see the sincerity in your actions, and I believe that everyone deserves a second chance." Karen felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of relief washing over her. "Thank you, Mrs. Sinclair. I promise I'll never do anything like that again. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, I swear." Mrs. Sinclair chuckled softly. "I know you will, my dear, and I'm grateful for that. Now, why don't you tell me more about these fundraising efforts of yours? I'd love to hear all about it." As Karen launched into an enthusiastic retelling of her various community events, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and redemption. It had been a long and difficult journey, but she had proven that she was more than just an entitled, reckless woman. She was someone who was willing to take responsibility for her actions and work tirelessly to make amends. And in the end, that was what. As the months passed, Karen's relationship with Mrs. Sinclair and her family continued to grow stronger. The elderly woman's physical recovery was slow and arduous, but with Karen's steadfast support and the additional funds she had raised, the financial burden was gradually lifted. One day, during a visit, Mrs. Sinclair turned to Karen with a thoughtful expression. "You know, my dear, I've been thinking a lot about what happened that day in the alley, about how your impulsive decision to help me ended up causing me so much pain and suffering." Karen felt a familiar pang of guilt, but she remained silent, knowing that Mrs. Sinclair needed to express her feelings. "At first, I was consumed by anger and resentment. I couldn't understand how someone could be so reckless and thoughtless. But then, as I watched you pour your heart and soul into making things right, I started to see a different side of you." Mrs. Sinclair paused, her gaze softening. "You know, we all make mistakes, Karen. Sometimes, we don't even realize the impact our actions can have on others. But what matters is how we choose to respond to those mistakes." Karen nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Sinclair. I never meant to hurt you. I don't know. I guess I thought I was being helpful, but I was so wrong." "I know, dear," Mrs. Sinclair said gently, "and I can see now that you're truly remorseful. That's why I've decided to forgive you." Karen's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. You forgive me?" Mrs. Sinclair nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yes, my dear, I forgive you. It's been a long and difficult road, but I can see the sincerity in your actions, and I believe that everyone deserves a second chance." Karen felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of relief washing over her. "Thank you, Mrs. Sinclair. I promise I'll never do anything like that again. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I swear." Mrs. Sinclair chuckled softly. "I know you will, my dear, and I'm grateful for that. Now, why don't you tell me more about these fundraising efforts of yours? I'd love to hear all about it." As Karen launched into an enthusiastic retelling of her various community events, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and redemption. It had been a long and difficult journey, but she had proven that she was more than just an entitled, reckless woman. She was someone who was willing to take responsibility for her actions and work tirelessly to make amends. And in the end, that was what truly mattered. In the years that followed, Karen and Mrs. Sinclair's bond only grew stronger. The elderly woman became a mentor and a source of wisdom, helping Karen to navigate the challenges of adulthood and learn from her past mistakes. Together, they advocated for greater accessibility and support for those with disabilities, their shared experiences fueling their passion for change. Karen's once tarnished reputation was slowly restored, as the community witnessed her transformation from an impulsive, entitled woman to a compassionate, driven individual. And though the memory of that fateful day in the alley would never fully fade, it had become a testament to the power of redemption and the transformative nature of true remorse. As Karen looked back on her journey, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude. She had faced her demons head-on, and in doing so, had not only made amends, but had also discovered a deeper sense of purpose and meaning in her life. And for that, she would be